Some say lightning never strikes the same place twice. But fate? Fate has a way of circling back when you least expect it, wrapping around your life like a delicate chain of coincidences until you can't tell where the pattern began. Thaddeus Blackwood knew this truth better than most, though he wouldn't realize it until that rainy Tuesday morning that changed everything. Standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, he absently fingered the jade pendant that hung from his neck, a habit he'd developed over 25 years of wearing it. Below him, Manhattan stretched out like a glittering chessboard, each piece moved by his investments, his innovations, his empire. The headlines called him America's youngest tech titan. The magazines showcased his sleek 50-story headquarters, his philanthropic initiatives, his carefully curated public image. But none of them caught the hollow look in his eyes when he thought no one was watching, or the way his fingers always found that pendant in moments of doubt. Mr. Blackwood? Harper Wells, his executive assistant, cleared her throat from the doorway. The board is waiting in the conference room for your annual charity initiative presentation. Thad didn't turn around immediately. The jade pendant felt unusually heavy against his chest today. Tell me, Harper, why did we choose Hope Haven Orphanage this year? Their grant application was exceptional, Harper replied, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she approached his desk. And their location in the Bronx aligns with our initiative to invest in underserved communities. Plus, the press loves a good orphanage story. She paused, studying his reflection in the window. Though I suspect you're asking for a different reason. A ghost of a smile crossed Thad's face. 20 years had taught Harper to read him better than anyone. I grew up in a place like that, he said quietly. Not Hope Haven, but similar. Before everything. Before this. He gestured at the empire sprawled below them. I know, Harper said softly. It's in your unauthorized biography. Chapter 3. Thad finally turned, raising an eyebrow. You rid that trash? Know thy enemy, Harper shrugged. Especially when they're selling 3 million copies of your life story. She held out a tablet displaying the day's schedule. The board is waiting, and tomorrow's orphanage visit is set for 9 a.m. sharp. Thad nodded, straightening his tie. The pendant settled back against his chest, a familiar weight. As he strode toward the conference room, memories flickered at the edges of his mind. A small hand in his, a matching pendant, a promise he couldn't keep. He pushed them away, as he had for 25 years. He didn't know it yet, but in less than 24 hours, an 8-year-old boy named Maverick would speak 7 words that would crack his carefully constructed world wide open. And that pendant, the one he'd worn every day since he was 17, would suddenly become much more than just a reminder of what he'd lost. But for now, Thaddeus Blackwood walked into his board meeting, armor intact, the weight of his past safely tucked beneath his $1,000 shirt. After all, lightning never strikes the same place twice. Or does it? Hope Haven Orphanage stood like a weathered guardian on the corner of Palmer Avenue, its red brick walls holding stories of 1,000 hellos and goodbyes. In room 204, 8-year-old Maverick was already awake before the morning bell, watching dawn paint shadows across his sister's sleeping face. Willow always looked so peaceful in these quiet moments, her small hand curled around the jade pendant that never left her neck. Time to wake up, Butterfly, he whispered, using their mother's old nickname for her. At 6, Willow was still young enough to believe in magic. Young enough that the memories of their mother were beginning to fade, like old photographs left in the sun. But Maverick remembered everything, the lavender scent of their mother's hair, the way her hand shook as she placed the jade pendant around Willow's neck, the promise she made him make. Take care of your sister, she had said, her voice barely a whisper in that sterile hospital room. The pendant, it's more precious than you know. Keep it safe until... But she never finished that sentence, leaving Maverick with a mystery that weighed on his young shoulders like a heavy winter coat. Willow stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Is it morning already?" "Almost time for Miss Evangeline's special pancakes," Maverick grinned, already hearing the familiar bustle of the orphanage coming to life. Down the hall, younger kids were giggling, their feet pattering against the worn wooden floors. Somewhere, a baby was crying, and the ancient heating system groaned its daily protest against the autumn chill. Miss Evangeline Grace had worked at Hope Haven for 15 years, and she knew every creak in its floors, every child's favorite comfort food, every nightmare that needed soothing. She watched now from the doorway as Maverick helped Willow button her cardigan, the jade pendant catching the morning light. "Your mother had a heart bigger than the ocean," Miss Evangeline said softly, making both children look up. She moved into the room, her silver hair caught in its usual neat bun, her dark skin creased with smile lines. "She used to volunteer here, you know, long before you two came to stay with us." This was news to Maverick. "She did?" Miss Evangeline nodded, sitting on Willow's bed. Every Thursday afternoon, she'd bring books and read to the children, said everyone deserves a story that makes them believe in tomorrow. She reached out, gently touching the pendant at Willow's throat. She was wearing this the very first day she came here. Willow's small fingers wrapped protectively around the jade. "Did she tell you where it came from?" Something flickered across Miss Evangeline's face, something Maverick couldn't quite read. "She said it was a reminder that family finds its way back to you, no matter how long it takes." She stood up, smoothing her skirt. "Now, who's ready for pancakes? We've got a big day ahead. Important visitors coming." As they followed Miss Evangeline to the dining hall, Maverick couldn't shake the feeling that she knew more than she was saying. But then Willow slipped her hand into his, tugging him toward the smell of breakfast, and he pushed the thought aside. He had promises to keep after all. A sister to protect, a pendant to guard. He didn't know that in just a few hours a sleek black car would pull up outside Hope Haven. He couldn't have guessed that a man in an expensive suit would walk through those doors, carrying the weight of his own secrets. And he had no way of knowing that the jade pendant, bouncing against his sister's heart as she skipped down the hallway, was about to become the key to unlocking a mystery bigger than any 8-year-old should have to solve. But then again, fate has a way of choosing its own messengers. The black Mercedes rolled to a stop outside Hope Haven precisely at 9, its tinted windows reflecting the morning sun like polished obsidian. Thad stared at the building through the glass, his fingers unconsciously finding the pendant beneath his shirt. Something about the old brick walls made his chest tight. Maybe it was the peeling paint around the windows, or the worn stone steps, or the way the morning light caught the metal jungle gym in the small yard. It all felt achingly familiar. "Mr. Blackwood?" Harper's voice cut through his thoughts. "The director is waiting." Inside, Hope Haven smelled exactly like Thad remembered from his own childhood in a different orphanage, a mix of industrial cleaner, old books, and something that might have been cookies. Children's artwork lined the halls, bright splashes of crayon dreams, framed in construction paper. A group of small faces peeked around corners as he passed, whispering behind cupped hands. Director Collins led them on the official tour, rattling off statistics and needs assessments, but Thad found his attention wandering. Through an open doorway, he caught glimpses of a reading circle, where a silver-haired woman was holding court with a dozen children. Her voice carried into the hallway, warm and rich, as she gave each character in the story a different voice. "That's Miss Evangeline," Director Collins said, following his gaze. "She's been with us 15 years. The children adore her." In the reading circle, a little girl with dark curls looked up, a jade pendant catching the light around her neck. Thad's step faltered, his hand automatically reaching for his own pendant beneath his shirt. But before he could process what he'd seen, they were moving on, deeper into the building. The tour continued through classrooms and dormitories, past a music room where an ancient piano sat waiting for willing fingers, through a dining hall where the smell of morning pancakes still lingered. Thad nodded at appropriate intervals, signed the oversized check for the cameras, shook hands with board members. But his mind kept drifting back to that flash of jade, so similar to his own. They were heading toward the exit when it happened. A boy's voice, clear and curious. "Sir? My sister has a necklace just like yours." Thad turned. The boy, 8, maybe 9 years old, stood in the hallway, pointing at the small bit of jade that had slipped out from behind Thad's tie. Behind him, the little girl from the reading circle clutched her own pendant, her eyes wide. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Thad's ears filled with a rushing sound as he stared at the pendant around the girl's neck, identical to his own, down to the small chip in the corner and the distinctive pattern in the stone. His sister's voice echoed in his memory. "As long as we have these, we'll find each other again." "Where?" His voice cracked. He cleared his throat, aware of Harper's concerned gaze, of Director Collins' confusion, of the boy's unflinching stare. "Where did you get that pendant?" "Our mother gave it to Willow," the boy said, moving slightly in front of his sister. "Before she died. I'm Maverick, and that's Willow. She said it was important that we had to keep it safe." Thad's knees felt weak. He knew he should say something, do something, but all he could hear was his sister's voice from 25 years ago. "Promise you'll find me, Thad. Promise you won't stop looking." And now here he stood, in a hallway that smelled of industrial cleaner and hope, staring at a piece of jade that might finally lead him to the answers he'd spent half his life searching for. But as he looked at Maverick's protective stance, at Willow's small fingers wrapped around her pendant, he realized that finding those answers might cost these children everything they had left of their mother. Outside, the autumn wind rattled the old windows of Hope Haven, and somewhere in the building, a piano began to play. The past and present collided in that moment, hanging suspended like dust motes in the morning light, waiting to see which way fate would fall. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of sleepless research and endless cups of coffee. Thad had converted his home office into what Harper jokingly called Conspiracy Central, with documents spread across every surface and digital records filling multiple screens. His perfectly ordered world had dissolved into a maze of possibilities, each one leading back to that jade pendant around little Willow's neck. "Their mother worked for TechVision," Harper said, placing a fresh coffee on his desk and sliding a tablet in front of him. "Sarah Martinez. She was part of the original development team back in 2015, before you sold the company." She paused, watching his face carefully. "She worked in the same department as your sister." Thad's fingers froze over his keyboard. The name hit him like a physical blow. Sarah Martinez. How had he not made the connection before? Images flashed through his mind. A young woman with quick, laughing eyes, always at his sister's side during company events. The two of them huddled over computers late into the night, speaking that rapid-fire code language he could never quite follow. "Pull up everything we have on her," he said, his voice rough from lack of sleep. "Employment records, personal history, everything after she left TechVision." "Already did." Harper swiped through several screens. "She left the company in 2018, freelanced for a while, then her health declined rapidly in 2022. Harper's voice softened. "She spent her final months volunteering at Hope Haven, reading to the children, even when she could barely stand." Miss Evangeline's words from the day before suddenly took on new meaning. She had known, must have known the whole time, about Sarah's connection to his sister. But how much more did she know? A gentle knock interrupted his thoughts. Miss Evangeline stood in his office doorway, her silver hair catching the morning light. He'd sent a car for her, unable to wait until normal business hours for answers. "I wondered how long it would take you to find out about Sarah," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk. She reached into her bag and pulled out a weathered envelope. "She left this for you, but made me promise not to give it to you unless—" She glanced at the jade pendant around his neck. Thad's hands trembled slightly as he took the envelope. The paper was soft with age, his name written in familiar handwriting, not Sarah's, but his sister's. The room seemed to hold its breath as he broke the seal. "Dear Thad," the letter began, "if you're reading this, it means you've found them. And if you've found them, you're finally ready to know the truth about what happened the day I disappeared." Harper quietly slipped out of the office. Miss Evangeline remained, her hands folded in her lap, watching as Thad's world shifted on its axis with each word he read. "Sarah was more than my best friend," the letter continued. "She was my protector, my confidant, and in the end, my salvation. What I never told you was that the night I vanished, I didn't leave by choice. Someone had discovered what we were developing in the lab, something that could have changed everything. Sarah helped me escape, took my pendant as proof of life, and promised to keep it safe until it was time." The letter blurred as Thad's eyes filled with tears. Outside his penthouse windows, Manhattan continued its endless dance of light and shadow, unaware that in this room, 25 years of questions were finally finding their answers. But with each revelation came a new question, each truth, a new responsibility. Because somewhere in Hope Haven, 2 children were carrying the weight of a story they didn't even know they were part of. And Thad was beginning to realize that finding his sister's pendant wasn't the end of the mystery. It was just the beginning. Back at Hope Haven, change hung in the air like static before a storm. Maverick noticed it first, the whispered conversations that stopped when children walked by, the way Miss Evangeline's smile seemed strained around the edges, and most worryingly, the increased number of visitors in expensive suits who kept looking at Willow with too much interest. He found her that afternoon in their secret spot behind the old piano in the music room, her small fingers tracing the jade pendant as she hummed their mother's favorite song. The autumn light streaming through the dusty windows turned her into a painting, all soft edges and shadow, looking so much like the photograph of their mother that Maverick kept hidden in his sock drawer. "They're trying to split us up, aren't they?" Willow's voice was small but steady. At 6, she understood more than most people thought. Maverick sat beside her, their shoulders touching. "I heard Miss Patterson talking to Director Collins, that rich man who visited, Mr. Blackwood. He's been asking questions about us, about Mom." He swallowed hard. "And there's another family that wants to adopt, but just you." The pendant caught the light as Willow's head snapped up. "No, they can't separate us. Mom said we had to stay together. She made us promise." Outside the music room, footsteps echoed down the hallway, the sharp click of expensive shoes against worn linoleum. Maverick held his breath until they passed. When he was sure they were alone again, he pulled out a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. "I found this in Miss Evangeline's office," he whispered. "I know I shouldn't have been looking, but—" He smoothed the paper carefully. It was a photograph, yellowed with age, showing 2 young women in lab coats, both wearing jade pendants identical to Willow's. One was their mother, younger and healthier than Maverick had ever known her. The other woman looked startlingly like Mr. Blackwood. "That's why he was so interested in your necklace," Maverick said. "His sister had one just like it. And look at the writing on the back." Willow turned the photo over. In faded ink, their mother's handwriting read, "The truth stays hidden until all 3 pendants find their way home. Keep them safe, keep them separated, keep them secret. Lives depend on it." A door slammed somewhere in the building, making them both jump. Through the music room's window, they could see a sleek black car pulling up to Hope Haven's entrance. Mr. Blackwood stepped out, his own pendant visible against his dark suit. "We have to figure this out," Maverick said, tucking the photo away. "Before they can separate us. Mom left us clues. The pendant, this picture, maybe more. She was trying to tell us something important." Willow's hand found his, squeezing tight. But what if solving the mystery means losing each other? Before Maverick could answer, Miss Evangeline's voice carried down the hallway, calling their names. They could hear her walking toward the music room, accompanied by those same expensive-sounding footsteps from before. "Whatever happens," Maverick whispered quickly, "remember what Mom always said about the pendant. It's not just jewelry, it's a compass that points toward home. And you're my home, Willow, no matter what." The footsteps grew closer. Willow's pendant seemed to grow warmer against her chest, almost as if it was trying to tell her something. Through the window, the autumn leaves danced across Hope Haven's yard, carrying secrets in their wake, while inside, two children held on to each other and waited to discover what fate had in store. They didn't know it yet, but the next few hours would test every promise they'd ever made, every bond they'd ever formed, and every truth they thought they knew. Because sometimes the biggest mysteries aren't found in hidden letters or secret photographs. They're found in the choices we make when everything we love is at stake. Thunder rolled across Manhattan as Thad stared at the computer screen, his sister's letter spread out beside the keyboard. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed sent a chill down his spine. Sarah Martinez hadn't just been his sister's best friend, she'd been her partner in uncovering something that had gotten them both marked for silence. "You need to see this," Harper said, rushing into his office with a stack of old files. "I found it in the original TechVision archives. Project Jade wasn't just a security protocol, it was a warning system. Your sister and Sarah built a backdoor into every major financial system in the country, but not to exploit them. They were tracking something bigger." Lightning flashed outside as Thad grabbed the files. There it was, in black and white. Transaction records, shell companies, a web of corruption that reached into the highest levels of corporate America. And at the center of it all, a name he knew too well. Gerald Kingston, his former mentor, and the man who'd given him his first break in the tech world. At Hope Haven, the same storm rattled the windows of the administrator's office, where Maverick pressed his ear against the door, straining to hear the heated conversation inside. "The adoption papers are already being processed," a man's voice said. Director Collins, sounding stressed. "The Kingstons have been vetted. They're offering Willow opportunities we couldn't dream of providing." "And what about her brother?" Miss Evangeline's voice was sharp. "These children have lost enough. The Kingstons are only interested in the girl, and given Mr. Kingston's reputation and influence..." Maverick's blood ran cold. Through the crack in the door, he could see Miss Evangeline standing, her hands planted on the desk. "Gerald Kingston is not getting his hands on that child. There's more at stake here than you know." The name hit Maverick like a physical blow. Kingston. He'd seen it before, scrawled on the back of that photograph, next to words that had been scratched out so violently the paper had torn. Back in the penthouse office, Thad's phone buzzed. Miss Evangeline's message was brief but urgent. "Kingston is trying to adopt Willow. He must have figured out who she is. We're out of time." The truth slammed into him with the force of the storm outside. Gerald Kingston hadn't just been after his sister's discovery, he'd been hunting the pendants themselves. Each one contained a piece of the encryption key that could expose everything. His sister had split them up for protection, trusting one to Sarah Martinez, who'd passed it to her daughter for safekeeping. But Kingston had found them, had probably been watching all along, waiting for the pendants to surface. And now he was making his move. Not through force, but through the legal system itself. A clean, respectable adoption that would give him control over both Willow and her pendant. Thad's hands shook as he reached for his phone to call his lawyers. But before he could dial, his computer screen flickered. Lines of code began scrolling across it. Code he hadn't seen in 25 years, written in his sister's distinctive style. The jade pendant around his neck grew warm, humming with an energy he'd never felt before. In her room at Hope Haven, Willow woke with a start, her own pendant pulsing with the same strange warmth. And somewhere in the city, in a penthouse office far grander than Thad's, Gerald Kingston opened a safe and removed a third jade pendant, its surface marred by a dark stain that would never wash away. The storm raged on, but beneath its cover, ancient machinery was grinding into motion. 3 pendants, 3 keys, 3 chances to finally uncover the truth. But with Kingston closing in and time running out, one question remained. How do you protect 2 children from a man who'd already destroyed 1 family to keep his secrets? The answer, Thad realized with growing dread, might cost him everything he'd built. But as his sister's code continued to unspool across his screen, he understood that sometimes the price of redemption is everything you thought you couldn't lose. Maverick made his decision at midnight. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a silence that pressed against the windows of Hope Haven like a living thing. He stood in the darkness of his room, watching Willow sleep, her pendant gleaming softly in the streetlight that filtered through their curtains. Their mother's voice echoed in his memory. Sometimes being brave means running away. He'd overheard enough, pieced together enough fragments of whispered conversations to know that tomorrow would be too late. The Kingston family's lawyers were arriving in the morning with final adoption papers. Once they were signed, Willow would be gone, swept away into a world of mansions and private schools, far beyond his reach. With trembling hands, he pulled out the backpack he'd prepared earlier. 2 changes of clothes, their mother's photograph, the emergency money he'd been saving from his playground candy business, and a hand-drawn map he'd made of the city. At 8 years old, Maverick understood that his plan was far from perfect, but he also knew that staying meant losing everything. "Willow," he whispered, gently shaking his sister awake. "We have to go now." She blinked up at him, instantly alert in that way she had always been able to read his urgency. "The bad man is coming, isn't he? The one Miss Evangeline was warning about?" "Mr. Kingston isn't going to separate us," Maverick said, helping her into her warmest sweater. "Remember the shelter Mom used to work at? The one she said would always help us if we needed it? That's where we're going." Across town, Thad sat in his darkened office, his sister's code still dancing across his screens. The encryption program had been running for hours, unraveling years of carefully hidden data. But his attention kept drifting to the security footage from Hope Haven, streamed directly to his laptop by the security system he'd quietly installed days ago. He watched as 2 small figures slipped out of their room, moving through the shadowy hallways with the careful precision of children who had memorized every creaking floorboard. His hand moved to his pendant unconsciously. Something about their movements sent him hurtling back 25 years, to another night when 2 siblings tried to escape a fate others had chosen for them. "Harper," he spoke into his phone, "get the car ready. And call Miss Evangeline. They're running." But he wasn't the only one watching. In his own office, Gerald Kingston smiled as his phone lit up with the same alert. "Found them," he said to someone in the shadows. "The girl still has the pendant. Pick them up before they get too far. And Kingston?" His voice hardened. "No witnesses this time." Back at Hope Haven, Maverick and Willow had made it to the kitchen's back door. The old lock had been easy to unlatch. Maverick had been practicing for days. The night air hit them like a wall of cold water, carrying the lingering smell of rain and wet asphalt. "It's going to be an adventure," Maverick said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Just like in Miss Evangeline's stories." They moved through the sleeping city like ghosts, 2 more shadows among millions. Willow's pendant seemed to pulse with each step, growing warmer against her chest. Neither child noticed the black SUV that pulled away from the curb 2 blocks behind them, or the identical vehicle that turned onto the street ahead. In his car, racing through the nearly empty streets, Thad's pendant began to hum with the same energy he'd felt earlier. His sister's voice seemed to whisper from the code still running on his phone. "The pendants will lead you home." The city held its breath as all the players in this drama converged on 2 children making their way through its shadowed streets. Forces set in motion 25 years ago were finally coming to a head, and at the center of it all was a brother's promise, a mother's sacrifice, and 3 jade pendants that held secrets worth killing for. Dawn was still hours away, but for Maverick and Willow, the night already felt endless. They clung to each other as they walked, their joined shadows stretching out behind them like a bridge between past and present. Above them, the stars struggled to shine through the city's light pollution, as dim and distant as hope itself. But sometimes, in the darkest moments, hope is all we have left to guide us home. The old homeless shelter on Madison Street looked nothing like Maverick remembered from their mother's stories. Its windows were boarded up, the front door chained shut, graffiti sprawling across its brick facade like bright wounds. He stood there, clutching Willow's hand, his heart pounding against his ribs as reality crashed in. They had nowhere else to go. "Maverick!" Willow's voice trembled. "I hear cars coming." The sound of engines grew louder, headlights sweeping the street from both directions. The jade pendant around Willow's neck had grown almost uncomfortably warm, pulsing like a heartbeat. As they backed away from the street, a half-hidden side door caught Maverick's eye, and there, barely visible in the rust and peeling paint, was a small jade symbol etched into the metal. "This way!" He pulled Willow toward the door, his fingers finding the hidden latch exactly where it should be, as if some deep memory was guiding him. They slipped inside just as 2 black SUVs rounded the corner. The shelter's interior was a maze of shadows and forgotten furniture, but their pendants cast a soft, impossible green glow that lit their path. Willow gasped as they entered what must have been the main hall. The walls were covered in the same symbols that decorated their pendants, spiraling across the plaster like luminous constellations. "Mom used to work here," Willow whispered, her fingers tracing one of the glowing patterns. But it wasn't just a shelter, was it? Before Maverick could answer, voices echoed from the entrance, heavy footsteps, the beam of flashlights, and then a familiar voice that made both children freeze. "Find them!" Gerald Kingston commanded. "The girl must be taken alive. We need that pendant. The boy is expendable." They ran deeper into the building, the pendant's light showing them hidden doorways and secret passages that seemed to appear just when needed. Behind them, Kingston's men were getting closer, their flashlight beams cutting through the darkness like knives. Suddenly, the pendant's glow intensified, pulling them toward a heavy door marked with intricate jade symbols. It opened at their touch, revealing a circular room filled with old computers and strange machinery. And there, standing in the center, was Thad Blackwood. "You're safe now," he said softly, his own pendant glowing in harmony with Willow's. "This is where it all began, where your mother and my sister built something that could have changed the world." How touching! Kingston's voice cut through the air like ice. He stood in the doorway, flanked by his men, a 3rd jade pendant hanging from his neck, its surface stained dark with what Maverick suddenly realized was blood. "The final pieces, all in one place, just like your sister planned, eh, Thaddeus?" "It's over, Gerald." Thad stepped in front of the children. "The program's been running for hours. By now, every transaction, every hidden account, every crime you tried to bury, it's all been exposed. The authorities are already moving." Kingston's laugh was hollow. "You think I care about exposure? The pendants were never about the money. Your sister discovered something far more valuable in her research, something that could rewrite the rules of power itself. And now, he pulled out a gun. I'll finally have all 3 keys. But he had forgotten about Miss Evangeline, who emerged from the shadows behind him like an avenging angel. "Not this time, Gerald," she said, her voice carrying the weight of 25 years of secrets. "Sarah and Rachel made me promise to protect their legacy. I won't fail them again." The pendant's glow had become blinding, their combined energy filling the room with emerald light. As Kingston turned to face this new threat, Willow's small voice cut through the tension. "Mom always said the pendants would know their true guardians." And in that moment, everything changed. The pendant's light seemed to pass judgment, their ancient magic responding to the hearts of those who held them. Kingston's stained pendant turned cold and dark, while the others blazed with renewed purpose. What happened next would be told in whispers for years to come. A story of light and shadow, of justice long delayed, of a brother's love and a mother's sacrifice, and of 2 children who carried the key to truth in more ways than one. In the aftermath, the old shelter felt different, as if the very air had been cleansed of decades of secrets. Kingston had been led away in handcuffs, his stained pendant now lifeless and cold in an evidence bag. Outside, red and blue lights painted the pre-dawn streets as federal agents swarmed the building, following trails of data that led to hidden servers and buried truths. Willow sat wrapped in a shock blanket, curled against her brother's side in what had once been the shelter's reception area. Their pendants still glowed softly, though the intense light had faded to a gentle warmth. Thad watched them from across the room, his own pendant humming in harmony with theirs, as Miss Evangeline finally told them the full story. "Your mother and Rachel, Thad's sister, they discovered something extraordinary," she began, her voice soft with memory. "Not just the financial crimes they were tracking, but something in the code itself. A way to encode truth into matter, to bind justice into physical form. The pendants were their fail-safe, 3 keys to unlock a power that could force truth into the light." "But Kingston figured it out," Maverick said, thinking of the photograph he'd found. "That's why he hurt them?" Miss Evangeline nodded sadly. "Rachel escaped that night, but she was badly wounded. Sarah helped her hide, took 1 pendant to protect it. Kingston took the 3rd by force, but he could never unlock its power. The pendants respond only to pure intentions, to hearts that seek justice rather than power." "Rachel made it to me," Thad continued, moving closer to the children. "Just long enough to give me her pendant and make me promise to keep searching. His voice cracked. "She died in my arms. I spent 25 years building my company, gaining influence, trying to find answers, never knowing that Sarah had been protecting both the truth and her children right under my nose." Willow's small hand reached out to touch his pendant. "That's why Mom always said they were more than jewelry. She said they were a compass pointing toward home." She was right, Miss Evangeline smiled gently. "And now, after all these years, the pendants have brought their guardians together again." Through the shelter's broken windows, the first light of dawn began to paint the sky in shades of hope. FBI agents were carefully documenting the jade symbols on the walls, discovering the hidden network that Sarah and Rachel had built, a web of safe houses and secret rooms across the city, protecting whistleblowers and truth seekers for decades. "What happens now?" Maverick asked, his arms still protective around his sister. Thad knelt before them, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "That depends on you, both of you. I know I can't replace what you've lost, but I made a promise to my sister to protect the truth. Sarah made the same promise, and now maybe we can keep those promises together." The implications hung in the air. A new family forged from the remnants of the old, bound together by jade pendants and shared purpose. Miss Evangeline watched as Willow reached for Thad's hand, as Maverick's shoulders slowly relaxed, as 3 pendants glowed with quiet approval. "Mom would like that," Willow said softly. "She always said family isn't just blood. It's who you choose to love, who you choose to trust." Outside, the city was waking up to headlines about Kingston's arrest, about decades of corruption exposed, about a mysterious code that had brought truth to light. But inside the shelter, something more personal and precious was taking shape, a broken family rebuilding itself piece by piece, guided by the warm glow of 3 jade pendants that had finally found their way home. Dawn painted the room in shades of gold and green, and for the first time in 25 years, all the shadows seemed to fade away. Some said it was just the morning light, but others would swear that the jade symbols on the walls glowed briefly one last time. A final blessing from 2 mothers who had sacrificed everything to give their children a chance at truth, at justice, at family. 1 year later, the penthouse that had once felt like a museum of Thad's success had transformed into something altogether different. Children's artwork decorated the walls alongside complex jade symbols. Willow's piano music filled the rooms every afternoon, while Maverick's coding experiments, already impressive for a 9-year-old, ran on servers that once held only corporate secrets. On this particular morning, they all stood in what had once been Thad's home office, now converted into a memorial room. A wall of photographs told the story of 2 remarkable women, Rachel Blackwood and Sarah Martinez, brilliant programmers who had dared to stand up against corruption. Their jade pendants still glowed softly around the necks of their chosen guardians, no longer just symbols of loss, but beacons of a legacy continued. "Ready?" Thad asked, his hand on Maverick's shoulder. Today marked not just the anniversary of their reunion, but also the official launch of the Jade Foundation, a technology-driven watchdog organization dedicated to exposing corporate corruption and protecting whistleblowers. The network of safe houses that Sarah and Rachel had built was being expanded, their code refined and strengthened by a new generation. "Almost," Willow said, carefully placing a fresh sunflower beneath the photographs. It was a tradition she had started, this weekly offering to the mothers who had sacrificed everything for truth. At 7, she understood loss and love in ways no child should have to, but also in ways that made her stronger. Miss Evangeline, now the Foundation's head of operations, watched from the doorway. The past year had revealed that her role had been far more than just a caretaker at Hope Haven. She had been the keeper of secrets, the guardian of Sarah and Rachel's vision, waiting for the day when 3 pendants would reunite and their children would carry their work forward. "Your mother and aunt would be so proud," she said softly, her eyes shining. "Not just of what you've built, but of who you've become." Maverick, still protective of his sister, but now secure in their new family, smiled as he pulled up the latest code on his tablet. "Look what I found in Mom's old programs," he said. "There's a message encoded in the jade symbols. It's like she knew we'd be here someday, carrying on their work." Together they watched as the symbols translated themselves across the screen. Truth finds its way home through the hearts of those brave enough to carry it. Outside the window, Manhattan stretched out before them. Not just a city of towers and ambition now, but a network of safe houses and secret rooms, each marked with small jade symbols that glowed faintly in the right light. Somewhere in a federal prison, Gerald Kingston sat in silence, his corrupted pendant long since turned to worthless stone. The truth he had tried to bury had finally found its way into the light. The morning sun caught the 3 pendants, making them shimmer with that impossible green light. But now they understood that the real magic had never been in the jade itself, but in the choices people made when confronted with the harder path, the truths they chose to defend, the family they chose to build. Thad looked at these children who had become his own, Maverick with his fierce protective spirit, Willow with her gentle strength. He thought of his sister Rachel, of Sarah Martinez, of all the sacrifices that had led to this moment. The pendant felt warm against his chest, a constant reminder that sometimes the longest journeys lead us exactly where we need to be. "Come on," Willow said, taking both her brother's and Thad's hands. "We have work to do." And so they stepped forward together, 3 pendants glowing like stars, carrying forward a legacy of truth and courage. Because some stories don't end when the mystery is solved. They end when the broken pieces finally come together to form something new, something stronger, something that feels exactly like home. In the end, it hadn't just been about exposing corruption or unlocking ancient codes. It had been about finding family in the most unexpected places, about healing wounds that had festered for 25 years, about 2 children and a lonely billionaire discovering that the greatest power isn't in technology or wealth or even magical pendants. It's in the connections we forge, the truths we protect, and the love we choose to share. As they left the memorial room together, the jade symbols on the walls seemed to pulse once more with that soft, impossible light. And somewhere, 2 mothers smiled, knowing their children had finally found their way home.